There's a recurring theme in my videos I make. I go back sometimes to other uh, examples which I've talked about, other subjects which I've talked about. Whenever there's a new development, and today I'm going back to the expansion or the migration of H. sapiens out of Africa. I talked about them last year. I've included the videos which are where I talked about these expansions, these migrations, um, and the new um, samples, new fossils that have been found that sort of corroborate these early migrations. I've always said in most of my videos that there has been more than one migratory um, uh, migration out of Africa by H. sapiens, our species. One was around 200,000 years ago, another one was about 100,000 years ago, and the last one, more or less, about 60-ish thousand years. And uh, from genetic evidence and actual physical evidence, we've been able to um, piece these dates more or less together. Now, today I got an article which comes from, it's in The Guardian, but in the description I've placed the actual study, which is a PDF which you can read. You can't download it, unfortunately, but it's there. And the actual published paper in the site that was published in, and a few other sources on this. I'm reading The Guardian because it's fine. I read it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's succinct and it's just long enough and short enough to um, basically fit in my presentation. So I'm going to share it, and we shall read. Finger fossils show humans went east of Africa earlier than thought. I talked about our first the fossils of that pushed back our lineage, H. sapiens, at least H. sapiens, not specifically H. sapiens sapiens, back to about 300 and a bit thousand years from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco. And there's also 200,000-year-old examples of H. sapiens in Ethiopia and South Africa. And last year, I talked about the jawbone of another H. sapien fossil from Mycelia in Israel. Today we have evidence. This article shows us that they have found in the Arabian desert a finger bone, a fossil of the finger phalanx bones from about 80,000 years ago. So it's normal. It's okay. It's fine. In fact, it's awesome because we are discovering more, because we are searching for them more. So we will have surprises. I'm not surprised now. I'm looking for the confirmations of these sites. So, the fossilized human finger bone dating to almost 90,000 years ago has been discovered in the Saudi Arabian desert. I find researchers say point to the possibility that our species ventured towards the east earlier than previously thought. Well, there's a hypothesis that due to the climatic change that favored these areas, the Arabian Peninsula, I should say, not Iberian, Arabian Peninsula, has been fertile and green during certain periods of time, and one of them was around 100 and a bit thousand years. In fact, we know that from researchers that have done, the geologists and botanists, etc. So we know that this period of time, it was ideal that if there was an expansion, a migration out of Africa, these would be one of the routes. They think the routes. They think that from the Red Sea to the Arabian Peninsula, and then to elsewhere around the ocean, around the coast, more or less. They wouldn't gone straight through the desert, because there would have been still desert, but the sea levels would have been lower, so it would be more land exposed. There is in fact in the Red Sea and in the Persian Gulf, very close to the Arabian Peninsula, freshwater uh, freshwater springs that are now underwater, but they would have been above water then. Um, so yes, now researchers say that they have unearthed the oldest direct human dated fossil outside of Africa at the eastern Mediterranean region of the Levant. Of course, that was Massilia they're talking about, indicating that our species were not only setting up home at the doorstep of Africa outside of the doorstep of Africa, early on, they travelled even further afield, up to 25,000 years earlier than expected. 25,000 years would have easily been enough for a hypothetical route from East Africa to Australia in 15,000 years, in 7,500 years, in fact, if they travelled 2 kilometers per year in that direction. It would have taken them, which is 15,000 kilometers, 2 kilometers per year, about 7,500 years. They would have taken them hypothetically at the most. It would have, of course, it took longer, but that's the hypothetical that you could aim at. So the discovery of the fossil bone is like a dream come true, because it supports arguments that our team have been making for more than 10 years, says Professor Michael Petalia of the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History, a co-author of the research. This find, together with other finds in the last few years, suggests that modern humans, H. sapiens, were moving out of Africa multiple times during many windows of opportunities during the last 100,000 years or so. Even longer, I'd say even longer, 200,000 years, most likely. The find of the first modern human fossils to be unearthed in Arabia also sheds light to the route our species took as they travelled beyond Africa around southern Asia, suggesting it did not stick to the coast as previously been suggested. It shows, which I mentioned just before, one of the routes would have been along the coast. This one proves that they went overland. So there we have it. It shows us that humans were moving across the interior, the terrestrial heart of Eurasia, not along the coastline, says Petralia. And here's the map of where it is. You can see Iraq, Medina, and you see where they found it in Al-Wusta. That's where they found it. So Dr. Hugh Grockett, first author of the study from the University of Oxford, said the find ties in well with the apparent dates of previous fossils turned up in India, East Asia and Sumatra, and with artifacts in Australia dating to 65,000 years ago. I'd suggest that they're going to find artifacts in Australia to about 75,000 years, 70 to 75,000 years. I've said it here. It'll be, if they don't, nothing will happen. But if they do, I will be vindicated. As well as previous finds of Stone Age stone tools in Arabia, that he said suggest our species could have passed through Arabia on its way east. Of course they could. It's one of the routes easily. Why not? If you look at any map of the world, when you're looking at Africa and you are looking at the rest of Eurasia, obviously Arabia could be a stepping stone out of Africa. It is. It's there. One of the routes that I've suggested about the coastal route was from what is now Ethiopia, and about Ethiopia, Somalia, Djibouti, which is a bit further down, but basically Ethiopia, Eritrea, where the Red Sea is at its narrowest, that would be one of the routes taken, along the coast. Another one further up north, across the Negev or the Mediterranean, or etc. You have many pathways that would have been open that in that time period between 200, 100, about 150, 200 to 60-ish thousand years ago. Writing in the journal Nature, Ecology and Evolution, the team describes how the finger bone was discovered in northern Arabia in 2016 at the site of Al-Wutza in the Nefud Desert, with a collection of 380 stone tools nearby, suggesting groups of tens of humans would have been living at the site. Crucially, said Grokut, these stone tools were of an old-fashioned type. That's a bit fake. Countering the idea that human migration beyond the Levant was driven by our species developing better technology. So if they weren't, if they weren't Acheulean, which was the olden type, and they weren't Masturian, which were associated with Neanderthals, they could have been Levallois, they could have been Châtelperronian, they could have been a few other, but they would have been later. So my guess would they would have been something similar to Masturian. Old-fashioned types. Doesn't say what type, but with evidence of ancient lake highlighted that the dispersal was at least partly driven by climatic change. Changing climate. In that area, they found evidence, as this article suggests, that there were lakes there. So as you can see, lakes, it would have been higher rainfall, would have been greener, so there was a corridor. Could have been desert close by, but there was a corridor there. So the team also found fossilized remains of host of birds, reptiles, mammalian mammals, including hippopotamuses, which require water. Reptiles and birds, not as much, but hippopotamus do require a lot of water, so this area would have been more wet than it is now. While it is not clear whether the finger bones is of a man or a woman, or how old they are, how old they were when they died, or which hand it is from, the team say a careful comparison shows that the bones was from our own species, and it is probably the second bone from the middle of the middle finger, from the end of the middle finger. Signs of a knobble of the bone, they added, might be the result of manual activity, possibly stress for making stone tools. Yep, possibly, yep. Team dated the bones directly using a technique known as uranium series dating. The results put the bones at about 88,000 years. Plus or minus, there's a margin of error. The bones would have been in that area, I would assume. It doesn't say. I haven't read the article, the actual study, by the way. I just got it yesterday. They would have been exposed naturally to the elements, as they are quite. And they would have been accumulated the uranium radiation, so they would have extracted just a minute amount to the uranium decay to get a date. So yes, the animals tells us when animals were living there, there was not a desert. That the site was a lake, a small but permanent perennial freshwater lake in the grassland setting. I just explained. Genetic studies suggest that non-Africans today are descended from modern humans who walked out of Africa up to 60,000 years ago, with earlier migrants dying out. That is disputable. I don't know. I'm reticent about that the earlier migrants died out. They would have. We don't know. It's a theory. It's a hypothesis, possibly due to the impact of Neanderthals or being overwhelmed by further waves of our own species. There was no impact with Neanderthals except that we mated with them, and being overwhelmed by further waves of our species, That's also a hypothesis from the Guardian. So let us. It remains unclear whether H. sapiens at Al Wutsa arrived via the Levant by crossing the Red Sea or by going around the Red Sea's southern end. An idea supported by Donald Henry from the University of Tulsa in an accompanying article, which you can click in it. So Dr. Maria Antonia Martinian Torres, I've come across her, this doctor, before. Not saying anything bad, or just citing that I've come across her before in a few other studies. Director of the National Research Center of Human Evolution in Spain. Yeah, that's why I've come across her. She works near Burgos in the Atapuerca Foundation thingy-bob. With all the findings, I would say that the presence of H. sapiens in Asia before 56,000 years ago is out of doubt. So there's no doubt they were there before us, before this time. And so we can now move to the next question. How and why modern humans left Africa, and why did they take so long to enter Europe? That is the question. Why did they take so long to enter Europe? Re-enter Europe, I would say, because we were there 200,000 and about 100 and something thousand, at least 200,000 years ago, from the Neanderthal DNA the Neanderthal DNA that we gave to them, and then we took back again. So, yes, I've talked about that. So, this ends the article. So, it's going to be a short one again, and and just going to say hello to everyone in the chat. Sorry, I got a bit hoarse throat. Yeah, John. I'm not saying HOMO yet because router and route. Because if I say the Australian version of it, it sounds not nice. It sounds sexual, so I won't say it again. So everyone, Malafus, how are you? Davia, I said heard. Carlos David, my friend. So thank you all. I'm going to end it here, and till next time, I'm going to try and I really need help. I really need help to with OBS to get a backdrop and set it up. I'll try and get it done soon because I want to get back to OBS because that way I can see the chat and I can read the article. I can even put my ugly mug on the screen. So good night, everyone, and thank you all for listening. And I hope it was acceptable and up to the standard. Hope you liked it. Good night, everyone. Bye bye.